Okay, so bear with me for a moment and close your eyes. Imagine the sky. What color do you see? Blue? Good guess. But which blue? Are you and I seeing the same deep violet blue of dawn? Or are you seeing a brilliant rich cyan from a summer day? What color is blue? The ocean? The shimmer of a dragonfly? Maybe the station wagon parked across the street? But what's really intriguing me is this. Humans didn't always have a word for blue in any language. And if you didn't have a word for blue, would you still have been able to imagine it just now? Go ahead, try it. Try to think of a color that doesn't have a name. Yeah, I couldn't do it either. If you're like me, you bolted away from the spectrum, hurtling toward imagination, only to suddenly find your vision neatly slotted back into place, classified plainly as a version of some hue. Perhaps you labored to imagine a light pink purple, a dusky gray fuchsia, or a soft green. It turns out it's nearly impossible for us to see color or anything that doesn't have a name. On this episode, I'll explain exactly what I mean by that and how language frames how we see and don't see the world around us. My name is Christopher Grant Ward, and this is Rebel Nature. I'm an award-winning artist and naturalist obsessed with the ways nature can rewire our brains and change our perception of everyday things. I'm so happy you're listening. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, I read recently that even though humans have been using language for tens of thousands of years in some way, we actually didn't have a word for blue in any language for quite a while. And based on the analysis of the earliest writings, many scholars say it's as if we didn't even see blue for millennia. Well, more accurately, we saw it with our eyes, but we didn't recognize it and call it out in our brains as anything else but just another color in the spectrum. That is, of course, until we decided to give it a name. And if this is confusing, I'm right there with you. But let's just hold on to that thought for later. For now, let's see if history or science can give us any clues as to what's going on here.
The ancient Greeks are a great example. Despite their amazing advancements in science and knowledge, they had no word for blue. In the Odyssey, Homer's descriptions of color can be, at times, bizarre. The sky is the color of bronze. Stars are iron or copper. Sheep are red. Lions are honey green. Most conspicuous is the complete absence of the color blue in an epic story that literally takes place on the ocean. Instead, Homer describes the sea as wine dark, and he does this quite often. Scholars argue that the ancient Greeks probably saw blue, green, and gray as more or less the same color. If you're like me, that's really difficult to get your head around. I mean, for me, blue is right there. But I think that's only because I have a word for blue that I use when I look at the world every day. The Egyptians were some of the first people to have a word for blue, but their invention of the word only coincided with their invention of blue as a pigment. They called it, and I'm going to butcher this, but Hisbid Erit, which means artificial lapis. It's a brilliant, bright, almost turquoise blue that the Egyptians first created just to depict their gods in paintings and craft. They felt that blue was the only color worthy of depicting their gods, and this color still exists in preserved historic sites today, and it was the first ever synthetically produced color. Think about it. The first people to call something blue were artists creating a new color, a new pigment for representing the world.
And apparently, creating blue was incredibly difficult to do. This wasn't as simple as finding black from charcoal, red from ochre, or white from chalk. This required considerable effort and ingenuity from the Egyptians as well as those in ancient Afghanistan and China.
And yet, words for the color blue only seem to coincide with the creation of a pigment. It's as if we only bothered to name the color after we created a use for it.
But I mean, that sort of makes sense that we would struggle for a while to make blue, since blue is so incredibly rare in nature. I mean, first off, there's no true blue pigment in plants. Plants only achieve blue by mixing together certain chemicals in the right pH balance. But blue is even more rare in the animal kingdom. Of 1.5 million living animal species identified, fewer than 1%, say 15,000, even exhibit the color blue. And even with this 1%, it's hardly ever caused by a blue substance or pigment, but rather it's a light scattering effect. Take butterflies, they're a perfect example. Microscopic beads on their wings actually cancel out every wavelength of light, except blue. It's a magic trick. In fact, in a way, a blue butterfly is everything but blue. Dragonflies, blue jays, bluebirds, a mandrill's nose and its rear end. These blues are simply an iridescence of light that exhibits as blue. This effect also works for chameleons and iguanas who can control their skin to scatter light and show virtually any color. In fact, blue is so rare in nature, fewer than, say, 10 animals, including the olive-winged butterfly and robin's eggs, are examples of a true blue pigment in animals. Of millions of animal species on Earth, we can count on two hands the animals who pulled off the miracle of creating a blue substance.
Oh, and that sky we were imagining before, it actually isn't blue either. It's just that different wavelengths of light get absorbed when the sun is at different angles, which is why the sky changes colors throughout the day. It's more of an immense sort of prism. Okay, so this makes sense. Blue is incredibly rare in nature, and it was equally difficult for us to create on our own, so no wonder languages took their time before getting around to creating a name for this color. Seems like blue was sort of a luxury. And not just blue. Orange came along even later. For millennia, speakers of Western languages simply said yellow-red. Meanwhile, in India, there was a name for a fruit with a fragrant citrus smell. The Sanskrit name was, okay, I'm going to butcher this again, something like naranji. It wasn't till the 15th century, like 700 years ago, when oranges were brought to Europe, that we started associating an object with a specific color, and only then did we start identifying a separate hue. Oh, that flower? It's kind of red, it's kind of yellow, but it's actually more similar to the color of this fruit, this orange. That flower's not red. That flower is not yellow. That flower is orange.
It's a metaphor from nature. But of course, we name color after nature all the time.
Lime, pistachio, violet, cornflower, turquoise. Crayola crayons, they reference nature throughout. Carnation pink, watermelon pink, flamingo pink. Pink is itself just a tint, that is, adding white to a hue, in this case red. And pink is probably a good example for what we're talking about. It's not that hard to imagine a time when pink could have easily been called light red. Yet if I look at the color today, I can't see anything but pink. My natural world has been defined for me through a lens of labels, of words that tell me what I'm looking at. You know, as children, we used a different lens. Let's go back to the Crayolas. A basic pack has 10 colors. Green, blue, and violet mixed together was more than enough for us to imagine and represent all the blues that we saw in the world, whether it was accurate or not. A larger pack of Crayolas gives us more definition. We have blue, blue-green, blue-violet, red-violet, and something called violet parenthesis purple. The largest pack, 120 Crayola colors, included 20 shades of green, 19 shades of blue. This sounds like a lot, but the human eye can detect up to 10 million different hues. So now 120 doesn't seem like nearly enough, even though 10 colors used to be plenty. So how do we get by so ignorant of the rest of the spectrum? I like to do thought experiments sometimes to help me understand things. So let's reverse all of this. Imagine you and I are walking into a paint store. Hundreds, maybe thousands of names for colors that are utterly exotic and often silly. I actually looked up a few just for fun. Check these out. Arsenic, spill the wine, dead salmon, simmer down, disco nap, and ghost tree. Okay, so some of these colors referencing things we know, like wine or a dead fish. We might be able to guess their approximate color, but others, we would have no idea. This feeling of having no idea what color a word represents is exactly how it would have felt to the Greeks in 750 BC. If we pointed up at the sky and said, "The sky is blue," in Greek, of course. I think even when blue was pointed out to them, I imagine it would feel like an extraneous label, just like the colors in the paint store. In fact, I've seen this color, simmer down. It's a putty orange cream color quite often, but I wouldn't know to call it anything special except orangey until just now. Calling this color simmer down feels just as arbitrary, extraneous, and silly to me as blue might have felt to the Greeks thousands of years ago. But conversely, wine dark feels like a really nice paint color that I would like to see in my neighborhood paint store. Okay, so maybe interesting, but why does a history lesson about the evolution of blue in our civilization matter to a journal about nature and art and design? Well, because I'm an artist, and as an artist, I always want to make sure I'm never taking for granted why I perceive things as I do. And more importantly, I want to be able to take notice when my perception of something, as seemingly basic as color, seems to actually be based on rules that I've come to accept. This is blue. That is not blue. Remember the beginning of this journal, imagining the sky, seeing blue in our minds? Well, along the way, we all decided that the sky was now blue and no longer bronze, as Homer described it, that the ocean was no longer wine dark. I mean, for Homer, he saw blue together with gray and green in the ocean as its own beautiful medley. It's really quite poetic. So who is to really say which is a better description of the color of the ocean? And a better question, do labels and definitions of our natural world help us or hurt us? Well, I agree it probably helps us to understand and decipher our world when we have names to classify and organize things. And more importantly, language helps us communicate with each other when we have a shared understanding of things. But that begs a really important question. If I didn't always have a word for blue or orange, and just today I learned that simmer down was a color, what else is out there that my eyes are seeing but I'm not noticing, simply because I don't have a name for it? See, labeling things may help us see things, but then what gets omitted? Words don't explain as much as they simplify, organize. Wine dark revealed to the Greeks an infinity of hues, and it was more than good enough for their best writer. It goes without saying the Odyssey is still considered a classic today, even without the color blue, perhaps because it lacks it. Here's what I'm seeing. Words are great at organizing nature's chaos, but they aren't good at helping us explore it. As an artist, it's not my job to simplify things or necessarily to label them. In fact, it's the unknown that I'm looking to unearth. And apparently, there's an infinity of undiscovered colors, not to mention shapes, forms, ideas, and thoughts that exist in our world. And it's these things, these nameless things, yet totally undescribed, that artists are meant to uncover. Art shows us new ways of seeing, new lenses. Let's not forget that the Egyptians only first created a blue pigment and the word for blue for the sake of art. As artists, we show the world what has been hiding in plain sight, nameless, right in front of our eyes the whole time. So in that sense, let me try this again. When I close my eyes and I think of a sky, what do I see? Okay, maybe it's still blue. But honestly, it's also black for more or less the same amount of time as it's blue, right? And in between, it's sometimes pink, red, orange, scarlet, violet, vermilion, and green. Simmer down is in there too. And some days it stays gray all day. Some days it's a faded white. And also, as I've learned, sometimes it's none of these colors, but perhaps just the absence of others. This is the path I'm on as an artist. And I'm reminded that the nameless infinity of nature is my truest teacher. As I walk outside today, may I try to see the things I have no name for and wonder what they could be. Thank you for listening to my podcast, Rebel Nature. Don't forget to follow the show, and also, I encourage you to share this with just one person that you feel might find this episode worthwhile.
Support for Rebel Nature comes from an affiliate partnership with Blick Art Supplies. Rebel Nature is managed and produced by Quail Run Studios. Original music written and recorded by me. Any commercial music that may have been used in this episode has been licensed for airplay by the Harry Fox Agency, 40 Wall Street, New York, New York. You can learn more about me and my art at ChristopherGrantWard.com.